St. Mary Mead lay beneath a gentle frosting of snow, as though the village had been carefully dusted by a considerate hand. Smoke curled lazily from cottage chimneys, church bells practiced discreetly for Christmas Eve, and the air smelled faintly of pine, coal fires, and the promise of rich puddings. To Miss Jane Marple, seated by the window of her sitting room, with her knitting needles clicking softly, it was all quite as it should be, except that she had long learned that when things appeared too perfect, human nature was usually at work beneath the surface. She peered out at the lane where villagers hurried past with parcels and greenery. Christmas brought out both the best and the worst in people, Miss Marple reflected. Generosity, certainly, but also envy, resentment, and long-nursed grievances, which the season had a habit of stirring like a spoon in a teacup. This year, St. Mary Mead's Christmas celebrations were to centre around Greystone Manor, the imposing yet slightly melancholy house at the edge of the village. Its owner, Colonel Reginald Prothero, a retired army officer with a commanding moustache and a fondness for tradition, had announced a grand Christmas gathering. The highlight would be the unveiling of a family heirloom, the Angel of Bethlehem, a delicate Victorian glass ornament said to have adorned the Prothero Christmas tree for nearly a century. "It's worth a small fortune," Miss Marple had overheard at the butcher's, "and impossible to insure properly," whispered Mrs. Price, the postmistress. "Mark my words," Mrs. Bantry had murmured darkly, "something will come of it." Miss Marple, of course, remembered several village scandals that had begun with remarks just like that. On Christmas Eve afternoon, she accepted an invitation to Greystone Manor, walking up the long gravel drive with her usual air of gentle curiosity. Inside, the manor was warm, scented with beeswax polish and fir branches. The tree in the drawing room was magnificent, tall, symmetrical, and hung with ribbons, candles, and antique ornaments. Yet one space near the centre remained conspicuously empty. Colonel Prothero stood before the tree, frowning. "It was here this morning," he said sharply. "The angel. I saw it myself." Around him gathered the guests and household. Eleanor Prothero, his widowed daughter-in-law, elegant but visibly strained. Hugh Prothero, his grandson, charming, restless, and perpetually short of money. Margaret Finch, the Colonel's efficient secretary, with sharp eyes and tighter lips. Arthur Bell, a local antiques dealer invited to admire the ornament's value. Mrs. Wilkins, the long-serving housekeeper, fluttering nervously with her apron. "The ornament hasn't been stolen," Eleanor said quickly. "It must have been put somewhere safe." "Safe," the Colonel barked. "It was safe on my tree." Miss Marple listened quietly, her pale blue eyes missing nothing. She noticed Hugh's hand slip into his pocket and Mrs. Wilkins gazed dark towards the closed library door. The matter might have ended there, an awkward mystery to be solved after Christmas dinner, had not a scream echoed from the hallway moments later. Mrs. Wilkins had gone to fetch the sherry. They found Arthur Bell lying at the foot of the library steps, one hand twisted beneath him, his face oddly peaceful. The decanter lay shattered nearby, its contents spreading like amber light across the carpet. Dr. Haydock, summoned at once, shook his head gravely. "Dead," he said. "Not to fall alone, I think. I shall need to examine him properly." The police was sent for. Christmas Eve at Greystone Manor had taken a decidedly unseasonal turn. Miss Marple sat quietly in a corner, her knitting forgotten in her lap. A missing ornament, a dead antiques dealer, and a house full of people with secrets hanging from them like decorations on a tree. She sighed softly. Human nature, she reflected, never took a holiday. Superintendent Slack arrived with ill, disguised irritation at being dragged away from his Christmas plans. Snow dusted his greatcoat as he stamped into the manor, his expression suggesting that festive goodwill did not extend to sudden deaths. Miss Marple, he noted with a mixture of resignation and suspicion, was already present. "Now then," he said briskly, "let's have the facts." Dr. Haydock confirmed that Arthur Bell had been poisoned, traces of a fast, acting substance in the sherry, likely added shortly before his death. The fall, dramatic though it appeared, had merely hastened the inevitable. "Poison at Christmas?" murmured Mrs. Wilkins faintly. "How dreadful." Miss Marple thought of a village effort long ago, where homemade cordial had caused 6 people to be violently ill. The culprit, she recalled, had been a smiling woman with a spotless apron. She began, quietly and unobtrusively, to observe. Colonel Prothero was furious rather than grief-stricken. The man was a nuisance. He snapped, always poking about, talking of values. Eleanor Prothero appeared pale, her hands clasped tightly. "Or Mr. Bell had come to see me earlier," she admitted. "About selling the ornament." Hugh laughed a little too loudly. "Grandfather refuses to sell anything, of course. Sentimental nonsense." Margaret Finch, the secretary, spoke with precision. "Or Mr. Bell was in the library with the Colonel before tea. They argued." Miss Marple noted the emphasis on argued. Arguments, she had found, were often fertile soil for crime. Later, as the household waited in uneasy silence, Miss Marple took tea with Mrs. Wilkins in the kitchen. "It's a terrible business," the housekeeper whispered. "But if you ask me, Sir kept that ornament too close. Too much temptation." "Temptation?" Miss Marple echoed gently. "Yes, dear, that is often the trouble." She next encountered Hugh by the staircase, pacing. "You knew Mr. Bell well?" she asked mildly. He said, "He loaned me money once or twice." "Ah," said Miss Marple. "Money does complicate things." Miss Marple also spoke with Eleanor, who confessed in a low voice that the ornament was the last thing of value left to her late husband's line. "I wanted to sell it quietly," she said, "to secure Hugh's future." Miss Marple thought of a woman in Much Benham who had hidden jewellery in a flower tin to protect her son. Love, too, could be dangerous. By evening, Superintendent Slack had a list of suspects, and no clear solution. And still, the Angel of Bethlehem remained missing. The following morning brought fresh snow and fresh confusion. A search of Greystone Manor revealed no sign of the ornament. Worse still, new revelations emerged. Arthur Bell's notebook was found in his coat pocket. Inside were detailed notes about Greystone Manor's contents, and a penciled figure beside the angel that made Colonel Prothero gasp. "That's extortion," Hugh said grimly. He was blackmailing someone. Miss Marple agreed silently. Blackmail often ended badly, particularly when pride was involved. Margaret Finch was questioned more closely. It emerged that she had been dismissed from a previous position under vague circumstances involving financial irregularities. "I have been entirely honest here," she insisted stiffly. Miss Marple remembered a village treasurer who had once rearranged accounts to cover her son's debts and had been quite honest in her own way. Then came another twist. Eleanor revealed that the ornament had been insured recently by Colonel Prothero himself. "For less than its true value," Eleanor said, almost as though he expected it to disappear. Superintendent Slack frowned. Meanwhile, Miss Marple noticed something small but significant. In the drawing room, the Christmas tree had been rearranged slightly. A ribbon had been tied more tightly near the empty space. "Tied," Miss Marple murmured, "not hung." She also recalled Mrs. Wilkins' nervous glance towards the library door. In quiet conversation, Mrs. Wilkins admitted she had moved the ornament earlier in the day, at the Colonel's request. "He said it was safer," she whispered. "He took it himself." Yet Colonel Prothero denied this flatly. Tempers flared, accusations flew. Christmas goodwill was entirely forgotten. Miss Marple sat knitting, her needles flashing softly, her mind sorting facts as one might sort coloured wool. The poison, she reflected, must have been administered by someone familiar with the household routines. Someone who knew the sherry would be poured for Mr. Bell. Someone who feared what he knew, and the ornament. Perhaps it had never been stolen at all. On Christmas afternoon, Miss Marple asked Superintendent Slack for permission to gather everyone in the drawing room. "There is nothing like a family gathering at Christmas," she said pleasantly. "For bringing truths to light," she began gently, speaking of village parallels, of missing brooches, altered wills, and people who underestimated the power of observation. "The Angel of Bethlehem," she said, "was not stolen by an outsider. It was hidden, quite deliberately." She turned to Colonel Prothero. "You discovered that Mr. Bell knew the ornament was a forgery," she said softly. A gasp ran round the room. "A very good forgery," Miss Marple continued, "but a forgery nonetheless. The real ornament was sold years ago, to cover debts after the war. Pride prevented you from admitting it. Arthur Bell had discovered the truth, and intended to expose the Colonel unless paid. You poisoned him," Miss Marple said calmly, oozing a substance from the garden shed. Mixed into the sherry, the fall was staged. Colonel Prothero's shoulders sagged. "I only meant to silence him," he muttered, "not kill him." "And the ornament?" asked Slack. Miss Marple smiled gently. "In the tree trunk base," she said, "where something hollow might conceal something fragile. The fake angel was retrieved, beautiful, worthless, and tragic in its symbolism." Colonel Prothero was led away quietly. The scandal, Miss Marple knew, would ripple through St. Mary Mead for years, Eleanor wept softly, not for the ornament, but for the man pride had destroyed. Hugh stared at the floor, chastened. "I suppose I should have noticed," he said. "Yes, dear," Miss Marple replied kindly, "but families rarely see themselves clearly." Christmas was subdued that year, yet life, as it always did, resumed its gentle rhythm. Snow melted, gossip flourished, and the village found new decorations to admire. Miss Marple returned home, setting her knitting aside as she poured herself a cup of tea. "It is very sad," she murmured to herself, "but quite understandable. After all," she reflected, human nature, like Christmas ornaments, was often more fragile than it appeared.